My name is Joelle, and I trace money for a living. Not in the glamorous way people imagine when they hear forensic accountant. There are no crime scene photos, no courtroom speeches. It is mostly spreadsheets, bank records, and the particular satisfaction of finding the one transaction buried on page 38 of an audit report that makes everything else suddenly make sense. I have built a career out of noticing what other people hope stays invisible. For 4 years, I refused to look at my own family. The moment that changed that happened on a Sunday afternoon in late May, at my parents' house in Greensboro, North Carolina. My father had gathered everyone around his laptop on the back deck. Me, my older brother Reed, Reed's girlfriend Addison, my cousin Bria, and 2 of my mother's siblings. He pulled up a vacation rental confirmation for a 7-day beach house in Destin, Florida. 8 names were listed on the booking. Mine was not one of them. I thought it was an error. I actually leaned in closer to check. It wasn't. My father caught me looking and said, with the casual confidence of someone who had already decided the conversation was over, "Oh, Joelle, we didn't include you this time. You never take real vacation anyway. You'd just spend the whole week on your laptop." Reed made a sound between a laugh and an agreement. My mother said and went back to refilling the chip bowl. Bria asked whether the house had a hot tub. Within 45 seconds, the conversation had moved completely past me. I stood on that deck for another half a minute before I excused myself to get more lemonade. I was very calm. I am good at being calm when I'm actually furious, which is a useful skill in forensic accounting and a difficult one to explain to people who mistake composure for acceptance. What I was doing, while standing at my parents' kitchen counter pretending to read the label on a Tropicana bottle, was thinking about the family savings account I had been funding since my father's warehouse hours were cut 4 years ago. I had set it up as an emergency buffer. I contributed $650 every month via automatic transfer. On top of that, I had added extra deposits when my parents' escrow account came up short 2 years running. When Reed needed help with his truck insurance after a fender bender, and when my mother called in January saying the furnace had made a terrible sound. I had never tracked the running total in any rigorous way because I had told myself that family wasn't supposed to work like a ledger. I should have been tracking it. I stayed at that cookout for 2 more hours. I helped carry chairs inside when the sun went down. I hugged everyone goodbye and drove back to Charlotte with the windows down and nothing playing. 4 days later, my mother called and asked if the $5,400 transfer had gone through yet. I said I hadn't seen a transfer request. She said she thought she had sent it through the joint authorization I had created. I asked what the $5,400 was for. There was a pause. Then she said, "Some things came up, the Destin deposit, and your father had some bills." I asked her to send me the details. She said she would. She never did. Instead, the transfer request appeared in my banking app 40 minutes later with a memo line that said simply, "Family needs." I opened every linked account before I approved anything. What I found took about 90 minutes to piece together, and I had to write some of the numbers down twice, because I kept expecting them to change. The family emergency account held $38,340. My deposits over 4 years totaled $34,800. Contributions from everyone else combined, $3,040, nearly all of it from one lump sum my father had added when he initially agreed to participate. Every subsequent deposit had come from me. Then I looked at the withdrawals. $2,200 labeled home expense, $3,800 labeled auto read, $500 labeled missed, $400 labeled miss in entries spanning 3 years. I went back to my phone and scrolled through Reed's Instagram. He had posted a picture of new golf clubs in March, custom sneakers in August, a weekend in Nashville with Addison last October, a watch the previous December that he described in the caption as "finally treating myself." I cross-referenced the dates. Every single transfer had cleared within 2 to 3 weeks before one of those posts. My hands went cold, which happens when I know what I'm looking at before I can fully admit it to myself. I renamed all 3 savings buckets in the account with the same label, AUDIT COMPLETE. I know that sounds petty. It probably was. But I had been calling these accounts family support and shared emergency for 4 years, and I wanted 2 words that belonged entirely to me before anyone else touched them again. I declined the $5,400 transfer, revoked every standing authorization my mother had on the accounts, and moved my future automatic contributions into a new high-yield savings account I opened that same evening. By 9 o'clock, my father had called 3 times. My mother had texted twice. Reed sent a single message, "What did you do to the account?" I did not answer any of them that night. Here is the question I kept returning to, sitting on my couch at midnight, with a cup of tea I kept forgetting to drink. If I wasn't worth a spot on the destined booking, why was my paycheck welcome every month? And if the answer was that I was only family when I was useful, then what exactly had I been protecting? I needed to understand what I didn't yet know. That is always the part of any investigation that takes the most patience. Before I tell you what was inside that manila folder, and what happened when the full picture finally came into focus, I want to know, what would you do if the people calling you selfish were standing on a financial floor you had spent 4 years paying to keep beneath them? I called my father's older sister, Aunt Miriam, the next morning. Miriam spent 30 years as a branch manager for a regional bank in Raleigh before she retired. She has a deeply practical relationship with the concept of other people's financial choices. I called her not for comfort, but because I was beginning to suspect there was a layer to this I hadn't found yet. When I told her about the $5,400 request and what I had found in the withdrawal history, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she asked, "Did your mother tell you what Reed owes?" I said no. She said, "I need you to come see me." We met at her kitchen table 2 days later. She had a manila folder and the expression she gets when she has been waiting to have a conversation longer than she would have preferred. What she showed me was this. Reed had spent the previous 18 months trying to flip houses in the Triad area, buying distressed properties, renovating, reselling. The concept is not unusual. The execution had collapsed completely. He used credit cards to cover renovation materials when his cash ran low, borrowed against a personal line of credit to fund contractor overruns, and by the time the second property failed to move at the number he needed, he was carrying $68,500 in combined debt. He had been barely servicing the minimums. The renovation loans were not minimums, they were demands. He had told our parents in January. "Here," Miriam said, and slid her phone across the table. My father had messaged her in February. The text read, "We're helping Reed work through this. Don't mention it to Joelle yet. She makes everything about the numbers." A follow-up message 3 weeks later. "Joelle's fund has enough room to cover us while Reed gets back on track. She won't notice month to month." I read those messages twice. Then I looked at the next document in Miriam's folder. My parents had taken out a $43,000 personal loan from a credit union to pay down the most urgent portion of Reed's debt. The monthly payment on that loan was $890. Their income, since my father had reduced his hours and my mother worked part-time at a dental office, did not comfortably cover that payment alongside their mortgage and utilities. The plan, outlined in a budget my father had shared with Miriam in a moment he later regretted, was to pull regular amounts from my family fund to cover the shortfall while Reed's business recovered. The $5,400 my mother had tried to withdraw was not primarily a vacation deposit. It was $3,700 toward their loan payment and $1,100 for the destined booking. They had borrowed against a personal loan to rescue my brother, planned around my savings to rescue themselves. And 4 days before my mother tried to pull nearly $6,000 from an account I funded, my father had announced in front of the entire family that I wasn't worth a spot on the trip. "How long did they know?" I asked. Miriam pointed to the date on the first message. 8 months. During those 8 months, my mother had asked me twice to increase my contribution because things had been tight. I had raised it to $700 the second time she asked. During those 8 months, Reed had taken $4,100 from the family fund for what he told me was a plumbing emergency at one of his properties, an expense I had questioned briefly and then let go because I told myself I trusted him. And during those 8 months, my father had sat across from me at Thanksgiving and told my mother's cousin, "Joelle's the dependable one. She keeps the whole family running." They had not simply failed to tell me the truth. They had built an entire financial strategy around my not knowing it. I asked Miriam if there was anything else. She told me 2 contractors had filed liens against Reed's unsold property. If the situation didn't resolve, the personal loan my parents were carrying would continue accumulating interest at a rate their income could not sustain long term. I looked at the table for a moment. Then I asked her to photograph everything. I had a choice about how to proceed. I could go to my parents first and give them the chance to explain something that, based on the evidence, had no version I was going to find satisfying. Or I could talk to Reed alone first, without an audience. Through years of work, I had learned that people are most honest about financial decisions when there is no one in the room to perform for. I texted Reed and said I wanted to have dinner. I said I wasn't angry, which was partially true. I wasn't only angry. I was also tired and curious and very interested in hearing what he thought he was going to say to me. He agreed. That told me he believed he could talk me out of whatever I had decided. We met at a barbecue place in Greensboro on a Thursday. Within the first 4 minutes, he told me I was making this into a whole thing, and that Mom was upset and that I needed to understand the pressure they were all under. I put the credit union loan document on the table. The shift in his expression was the most honest thing he had shown me in months. His eyes moved from the dollar amount to my face. Where did you get that? Not that's inaccurate. Not let me explain. His first concern was about my access to information. That told me everything I needed to know about how much he had been counting on my ignorance. Does it matter? I asked. He pushed the paper back with 2 fingers. The debt figure was outdated, he said. His numbers were improving. You can't build something without taking losses. I worked a salary job and didn't understand what it cost to run a real business. I asked about the $4,100 he had taken from the family fund for a plumbing emergency. He said his property had needed serious work. I put the contractor invoice Miriam had found in my father's filing cabinet on the table next to the loan document. The actual plumbing repair had cost $940. He stared at the invoice for a long moment. You went through Dad's files. I looked at where my money went. He called me paranoid, then obsessive, then cold. Each word was aimed at moving the center of the conversation from the numbers to my character, which is a technique I recognize because I have sat across from people attempting it in professional contexts. I let him finish. Then I asked what he planned to do about the remaining $68,500. He said things were stabilizing. I asked him to show me revenue, current obligations, a projected timeline. He said he wasn't giving me access to his business records. I said then he wasn't getting access to my savings. He tried 3 different versions of a compromise, all of them involving me releasing money in exchange for a repayment promise attached to no documentation, no timeline, and no collateral. After the 3rd version, he leaned back and said what I had been waiting for. You have almost 40 grand sitting there doing nothing. I'm your brother. There it was. My savings had already been converted in his mind into a moral obligation. He wasn't requesting my help. He was framing my refusal to provide it as a character failure. What assets do you still have? I asked. He said that wasn't the point. The truck? I need the truck. The golf clubs? His jaw tightened. The watch? It's not worth that much. Sell it anyway, I said. He stared at me. Sell the truck if you need to. Sell the watch. Liquidate the remaining inventory. Negotiate with the contractors. Get a second job. There are 5 things available to you before my account becomes option 6, and I named them before I sat down. He told me I had always made him feel like he was never doing enough. That I turned everything into a case to win. Reed, I said, this conversation is about $68,000. The spreadsheet seems relevant. He went quiet. Then he said that if our parents fell behind on the loan because I kept the account frozen, it would be on me. People would know I had the money and chose to watch them struggle. I recognized this too. It was not guilt, it was a threat. Cooperate, or we make you the villain for consequences you didn't create. That sounds like a warning, I said. It's reality. Reality is that you borrowed money you couldn't repay. Our parents took out a personal loan to cover you. Then they planned around money I never agreed to commit to that purpose. What you're describing is a strategy for controlling which version of events reaches the family first. He told me I always did this, made everything a negotiation. I turned nothing into anything, I said. I'm reading documents you assumed I'd never see. He left without finishing his food. I stayed and ordered peach cobbler because I had driven 45 minutes and I had earned it. 2 days later, my mother texted inviting me to dinner at their house on Saturday. She said it would be just the family, a calm conversation to sort this out. My father sent a separate message saying I should bring my bank login information so we can clear up the access issue together. I knew exactly what that dinner would look like. I arrived with a folder. When I walked in, my parents were already seated at the dining room table with Reed, Aunt Miriam, two of my father's brothers, one of my mother's sisters, and both cousins who had been at the Memorial Day cookout when my name wasn't on the destined booking. My father had assembled an audience. He believed that collective pressure would accomplish what 4 days of unanswered phone calls had not. He opened by telling everyone I had locked the family out of an emergency account over what he called a hurt feeling about a trip. My mother looked at me with the expression she has refined over 30 years. The one that means there is still time to choose to be reasonable. I opened my folder and placed a single printed page on the table. At the top, total account balance. Below that, a 2-line breakdown. Joelle, $34,800, all $1,540. My father stopped talking. 4 days after Dad told me in front of this family that I wasn't included in the destined vacation, I said, Mom submitted a transfer request for $5,400 labeled family needs. I asked for details. None came. I placed the next document on the table. What I found later was that $3,700 of that request was to cover the monthly payment on a personal loan taken out to address Reed's business debt. The remaining $700 was for the resort deposit. My mother's sister asked quietly, "What loan?" My father said this was a private matter. "You arranged this dinner," I said. He said I was embarrassing the family. "The documents are what they are," I said. "I just printed them." I read the message my father had sent Miriam. The one that said Joelle's fund gives us room until Reed stabilizes, and the one that said she makes everything about numbers. Don't mention it yet. My father said Miriam had no business sharing family communications. Miriam said she had told him in March that this plan had a problem, and he had told her it wasn't her concern. She had been waiting for the right moment. One of my uncles turned to Reed and asked him directly how much debt he was carrying. Reed looked at the table. My father made the mistake that ended any possibility of this remaining a misunderstanding. He hit his palm flat against the table, not violently, but hard enough that the glasses rattled, and said, "So what? She can afford it. Reed has a mortgage. He has a business. He has a future he's building. Joelle has her apartment and her paycheck and nothing depending on her." The room went completely quiet. I waited 3 full seconds. 4 days ago, I said, "Your argument for leaving me off the vacation was that I'm not really family in the way that counts. Today, your argument for using my savings is that I don't have enough going on to notice the difference. I would like to understand which version I'm supposed to take seriously." Someone at the far end of the table turned toward my father and said simply, "That's a hard position to defend." My father's face went red. He said he had raised me, provided for me, and that children owe something back to the people who gave them everything. "I have contributed $34,800 to this account," I said. "What number makes me count?" He had no number. Because the answer was never a number. The answer was that I was supposed to keep contributing and never ask where it went and feel grateful for the parts of the family that still wanted my money. My mother began crying and said I was humiliating them. "You chose the venue," I said. "I just brought the receipts." Reed finally spoke. He said I was trying to tear everything down. "Sell the truck," I said. "Sell the watch. Liquidate the inventory. Set up payment plans with the contractors. Get a second income. There are 6 options at this table that don't involve my savings account, and I named them before I walked in the door." My father said that the money belonged to the family in spirit, regardless of whose name was legally attached. I took out my phone. I opened the banking app. I turned the screen so he could read the 3 renamed savings buckets. AUDIT COMPLETE. AUDIT COMPLETE. Someone near the end of the table coughed in a way that was clearly hiding a laugh. My father did not find it funny. He told me that if I walked away from this, I should not expect to be welcomed back once I came to my senses. I stood, stacked copies of every document I had brought, and placed them in front of him. You already told me I wasn't worth including, I said. I finally believed you. Then I sent the one-page summary, contributions, transfer history, and the relevant messages to the family group chat my father had used for years to coordinate holidays and collect money for shared expenses. I wrote only, "Since tonight's discussion was made public, here are the numbers so no one has to choose a version based on who speaks the loudest." 22 phones received the same file within 2 minutes. My father stared at his screen. My mother stopped crying. Reed looked like someone who had just understood that the story he had been carefully managing was no longer his to control. I left before anyone could turn the evidence back into a negotiation. The Destin trip was canceled. The beach house had a partial refund window, and my mother exercised it 3 days after dinner before she lost more money on the deposit. My father told several relatives I had ruined the family vacation. That explanation did not survive long in contact with the documents already sitting on everyone's phones. 11 days later, Reed's next contractor payment came due. For the first time in months, there was no quiet transfer from my account to cover the gap. He called my father, but the personal loan had already stretched their budget thin. He called my mother, who was cutting back on everything she could. Then he called me at 12:30 on a Tuesday night and left a voicemail saying that if anything happened to our parents' financial situation because of this, I would have to live with it. I saved the voicemail and did not call back. He had not yet understood the difference between causing a problem and refusing to absorb one someone else had made. Over the following 6 weeks, Reed sold the watch, which he had implied was worth around $3,000, and actually moved for $1,100. He sold the golf clubs. He sold a set of renovation equipment he had been storing in a rented storage unit, and most of what remained of his house-flipping inventory went to a bulk buyer for a fraction of what he had valued it at. He picked up weekend work driving for a regional freight delivery company and kept his weekday job at a property management firm. 2 cousins who had invested small amounts in his flipping venture asked for formal repayment arrangements. After reading the documents, he set them up. His girlfriend moved out 2 months later, after learning the full scope of the debt he had described to her for over a year as manageable business exposure. She had accepted his version of the story because she had only ever had access to his version of the story. He told several relatives I had caused this. My cousin Bria sent a text that traveled through the family faster than anything I could have written myself. The debt caused it. Joelle just stopped hiding it. That one sentence did more than anything I had said at the dinner table. My parents spent 3 months restructuring. My mother canceled 2 streaming subscriptions, a quarterly beauty service, and a kitchen renovation she had been planning. My father added shifts. The personal loan payment remained, and their debt-to-income ratio was uncomfortable enough that they finally met with a financial counselor. Something my father had called unnecessary when I had raised it 2 years earlier. From what I later heard, the counselor gave them a clear picture of what was sustainable and what was not. They chose to stay in the house and adjust their spending rather than sell. That decision cost them significantly in effort and daily comfort. It was also the right one, and it was theirs to make. I had not made the one that created the problem. 6 months after Memorial Day, I put a down payment on a 2-bedroom condo on the north side of Charlotte. I used money I had been redirecting into my own account since the night I froze everything. I did not buy anything extravagant. I bought something mine, a mortgage that existed because I had chosen it, in a building where nobody could initiate a transfer with a memo that said family needs and expect it to clear. The morning I signed the closing documents, I sat in the empty living room for about 20 minutes before the movers arrived. I had sent my father a birthday card the previous year that said something about him having taught me what it meant to show up for people. Looking back, that sentence was more accurate than I had intended. He had taught me exactly that. He had also taught me what it looks like when someone believes that showing up is something owed rather than chosen. About 9 months after the cookout, my father called. His voice was lower than I remembered and careful in the particular way it gets when he is navigating something he has not fully decided how to approach. He asked how the new place was. I said it was good. He asked if I was settling in. I said yes. Then he said, I probably handled some of that badly. Probably. One word doing an enormous amount of work. I told him what was true. Being left off that vacation had hurt, but that wasn't why I froze the accounts. I froze the accounts because being left off the vacation had made visible a rule that had been operating for years. I was expected to contribute like an insider and accept treatment like an afterthought. Those two things had coexisted for so long that I had stopped noticing them as separate, until they were placed side by side on a late May afternoon on a back deck in Greensboro. My father said he had always thought I was strong enough to carry more than the others. I told him that being capable does not make someone endlessly responsible for the consequences of other people's choices. He didn't have an immediate answer to that. We talked for a few more minutes about ordinary things and said goodbye. I still speak with my mother, more regularly than with my father. Reed and I are not close. Last Thanksgiving, without being asked, he mentioned he had paid down another $9,000 on his debt. It was the first money-related thing he had volunteered in a year that involved progress rather than a request. I told him that was genuinely good. I did not offer a dollar. That restraint was the most useful thing I contributed to the whole afternoon. What I understand now, on the other side of all of it, is something I should have been able to identify years earlier, except that the people involved were my family, and I had decided that family was the one place my professional instincts weren't supposed to apply. When you keep absorbing consequences that belong to someone else, you are not protecting them. You are financing their ability to avoid the information those consequences are designed to carry. Reed did not begin making real changes until there was no fund left to quietly fill the gap between his ambitions and his actual situation. My parents did not confront the danger of the loan they had taken until the buffer I had been quietly providing stopped existing. And I did not start asking the right questions until my father showed me a vacation booking on a laptop screen and looked at me as though my absence made complete sense. I still have the 3 savings accounts. I never changed the nicknames back. Every time I open my banking app and see 8 complete looking back at me, I remember that I labeled them in anger and kept them in clarity. 2 words I wrote in the worst hour of that week became, over time, the most honest description of what I had done. I had finally audited the one account I had been avoiding for 4 years. The findings were uncomfortable and irrefutable and entirely mine. A boundary is not a punishment. It does not require the other person to agree with you, apologize, or understand your reasoning before it becomes valid. It is simply a decision about what you will fund, what you will absorb, and what behavior you will continue to make comfortable for other people at your own expense. I had spent 4 years making a very particular set of behaviors extraordinarily comfortable. So, when the people closest to you start calling your limits selfish at the exact moment those limits begin costing them something, what does that tell you about the role they had already decided, long before that moment, that you were there to play?